And in this session, we are going to be addressing one of the topics that was very well supported when we put out a call for topics for this year's forum. We've called the panel Sun, Sea, and Masts, Internet Governance and Caribbean Tourism in the New Normal. And in this panel, we'll be looking at the impact of, or we'll be addressing the impact of COVID-19 on the tourism industry and some of the measures that are being taken to try to revive the tourism industry in the Caribbean, and what technological sort of solutions are we seeing being applied or could be applied, and in applying such technological solutions, are there matters for policy or governance that would impact on our space here in terms of internet governance? We're going to have, in fact, what we've seen just very quickly is tourism. Well, travel was very, very limited in most countries, and in many of the countries closed their borders at least for a time. And I guess that time has been used to try to retool the industry to see what could be done to have it operate safely. There'll be two featured speakers in this particular segment, one from the tourism industry and one providing a different perspective from the perspective of an ICT regulator. The tourism industry spokesperson is Miss Heidi Alee from Tourism Trinidad Ltd, the acting chief executive officer of Tourism Trinidad Ltd. And the regulator would be Mr. Alee. He's actually the immediate former executive director for ICT at the Office of Regulation in the Cayman Islands. So we're getting two country perspectives and we're getting two different industries perspectives as well. And I'll supplement that as required by some additional data that was provided for me from the OECS Tourism Department. So let's get into it. Let's see what the impact has been, what the tourism industry has been doing, and what implications it might have for the internet governance space. And I'll ask Ms. Heidi Alee, the Acting Chief Executive Officer of Tourism Trinidad Ltd, to get us started. Heidi, all yours.
All right, great. Thanks so much. And let me start by sharing my screen and making sure that all is well.
Just 1 second, Heidi. I neglected to introduce myself for the day, and there might be some people who are wondering who's this person. I'm Nigel Cassimire, the Acting Secretary General of the Caribbean Telecommunications Union. I'll moderate this panel. Go ahead, Heidi.
All right, thanks. And you guys are seeing the slides okay, correct?
Yes, we are. All
right, wonderful. So pleasure being here. Thank you guys so much for the invitation and opportunity to have this dialogue. And I know we've been talking a lot this morning, so I was listening to the most of this morning's session, and really dealing with the infrastructure, the legal frameworks, the enabling environment, and all those things are extremely important and good. But where I get the kind of honor of shifting the conversation a little bit, as you alluded to, Nigel, is bringing it home, right? And really focusing on what is the practical application of everything that is going on in the world, really. And I had to smile at one of the comments. I can't remember who made it in the last session, but a comment was made about how while we're talking about data privacy and protection and all those things, there's an element of treating with it after the horse is already bolted from the stable, right? And it's true, and it's something that we all have to face and kind of navigate. And in our world, certainly in the tourism space, it's a situation where yes, we have to find the right and appropriate frameworks. We have to make a lot of structural changes in terms of both how we deliver services, how we think about tourism, how we just manage life, and have the innovations and everything else that is necessary. So there's an element of you know, managing the big questions, but there's also the people need to put food on the table, and business and life is continuing even while, from a structural standpoint, we try to answer some of the big questions. And that is, I think one of the panelists had mentioned the word balance in the last session. And I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind, that even while we search for answers, life continues, and it must. So from Trinidad, from tourism perspective, and specifically in Trinidad, and let me make a quick note, because sometimes people ask this a lot. They're like, what happened to Tobago, right? Because you're seeing just Trinidad. So we are still one republic, Trinidad and Tobago. But from a tourism perspective, there are actually two agencies, because Trinidad and Tobago are so different in terms of the products and the tourism products itself. So Tobago has an agency, and our agency is specific to Trinidad. But so that's why you'll see Tourism Trinidad and the word Trinidad used a bit, but we think about that from a destination standpoint, right? So just to explain that. So what I will start with in terms of looking at objectives, or sorry, no, some context setting. So Nigel, you referenced some of this, and I can tell you, I thought about what kind of image to put up here, how to kind of relate tourism. I can tell you my stomach has turned enough times in terms of looking at all the many different bar charts where you see all the bars and the lines and everything just going down. So I didn't put any lines or bars on this particular slide, and it's really just focusing on some of the statistics. Now, one thing, even as I put some of the doom and gloom up there that we're experiencing, one thing that I think is important to note is just putting into context tourism within the region. So according to a recent report put out by the ILO, tourism accounts for 33% of the region's GDP. So that is a huge percentage, even in Trinidad and Tobago, which, you know, historically may not be seen as one of the leading destinations from a tourism perspective, just in terms of, you know, we have the oil and gas and everything. But even in Trinidad and Tobago, tourism accounts for almost 8%. It's 7.8% of GDP. So it is a significant GDP contributor. And another important aspect of tourism is the number of jobs that are affected. So when you consider at a regional level, tourism accounts for 43.1% of employment. So that's almost half of the jobs within the region are linked to tourism. And in Trinidad and Tobago, just kind of bringing it home here, tourism accounts for in 2019, it accounted for 8.5% of total employment. That figure ranges usually between 8 to 10%. Whenever you think about both direct as well as indirect employment. And so it is a significant industry here in the Caribbean and also within Trinidad and Tobago. And you can see, just based on some of these stats that are in the slide, we're in some dire straits. And this is even at May. This doesn't even take into account the last few months. This was kind of early on. So it's an industry in crisis. And I know the crisis is not affected tourism alone, but certainly tourism has been one of the hardest hit industries. So whenever we think about kind of the topic of this forum, if you will, which is digital transformation, one of the things that we look at from a tourism perspective are how do we define success in tourism? And a lot of times, success and kind of the measurement of the effectiveness of tourism and those sorts of things, aside from GDP and jobs, tends to be like visitor arrivals. So how many people did you have entering your borders? from both an airlift as well as a cruise perspective. But those numbers with certainly in Trinidad and Tobago, our borders haven't been closed since March, and no date set for reopening, and a lot of other destinations, even in the Caribbean, have had to manage some closed border situations. We have to redefine success and what that looks like. And I would say one of the primary objectives has to be on safety, and this issue of health and safety. And whether it's for domestic tourists, which is kind of the staycation situation, or whether it's future in the case of Trinidad and Tobago, international visitors, but tourism destinations have to enter to new paradigms. And I want to spend a second on this word that I have underlined in the first point, which is adoption. So a little bit about my background. So yes, I am in tourism fully now, but I do come, now it's a little dangerous to say in this setting, but I do have a bit of a technology background. I would have worked for a software development company and also some Microsoft partners within the region. So the way I would classify it is enough to be dangerous in terms of what I know from technology. But even from a technology standpoint, this word adoption came up a lot, right? Because it's one thing to have solutions, and it's one thing to have technology and things that enable, but how is it actually being adopted? And this speaks to human behavior, right? So even though we're talking about digital transformation, I would say what my angle and perspective is looking at is the human transformation. Because again, you can have solutions, you can have different applications, you can have different things available, but how is the actual adoption and uptake of that? And how, as industry leaders, are we kind of leading that human transformation standpoint? Because it has to do, and from an adoption perspective, I would highlight two kind of pillars that I would say would be, one is access. Whether it's access to broadband, whether it's access to devices. I know this is a very hot topic in the field of education right now, but it affects even from an industry like tourism. This issue of access becomes really important, because whenever you think about all the different stakeholders within tourism, some things so hotels, accommodation, tour guides, and tour operators are some of the traditional and kind of primary things that we think about. But the tourism sector also affects another huge part of tourism, is transport operators, right? So here in Trinidad, you have maxi drivers, you would have taxi drivers. These are key suppliers to the industry, in the tourism industry, that have just as much some of the challenges whenever you think about access to resources. Another trend that we've been seeing that has been growing a lot, and that we're actually really excited about, but is the blossoming of community tourism. So you take remote locations, within a destination or communities outside of a main city center, and you see that there's a lot of entrepreneurship and a lot of opportunities springing up in these communities. But the same thing whenever you think about the access to the technologies that are needed to create this safe environment. And then, so aside from access, whenever you think about this technology adoption and the human transformation, the other thing I would say that is really important is paradigm shifts. And I wanna bring over onto my screen a little funny insertion, right? And I can use this, I think, safely within a tech space for everybody that we have on here. But this is just to show some of the historical paradigms that we may not even know exist. So I saw this online recently, and I hope it's going to show. And you guys may have seen this too. So over in Japan, there was this young engineer who raised a question, and he says, so why is the icon or the picture, the save button, he was in Excel, right? He's like, why is this picture represented by a vending machine with a purchase drink at the bottom, right? So he's looking at this, a young, techie, and saying, why on earth is a vending machine representative of saving something, right? Now, of course,
he's very young.
Although I would say, you know, what we say is very young. So I have 2 teenagers and they would say the same thing. Like I talk to young folks, and whenever you think about how you save, and I talk about a floppy disk, they're all like, what? Like there's just no concept whatsoever. But this is an example of kind of some historical habits. Yes, none of us have floppy disks. I don't even think you could find a floppy disk now. So while we may not be saving to an actual floppy disk, you know, there's historical ways of thinking and habits that are embedded that sometimes we don't even recognize, you know, that are happening. And I think whenever we talk about, you know, transformation, whether it's from a technology or a human standpoint, we have to become very aware of what some of those mindsets are, because at the end of the day, again, this is not a technology discussion as much as it is what is the environment, who are the people behind the folks that are using this. So I know I spent a lot of time on this first objective that talks about adoption, but I think it speaks to a lot of what's being covered in this discussion. The other key thing that we look at whenever we look at objectives for our industry right now is this effective communication. And it's communication not just you know, not just to visitors, but to the populace, to providers. It is a holistic set of communication that needs to take place. And you see a lot of destinations working on ways to proactively communicate, whether it's health and safety protocols or just manage expectations. That's another important thing that I think is that is happening. And this speaks to the third objective, and even the fourth. Whenever you think about these mindset shifts that has to take, and how we view tourism and the services that we provide, there's a lot of changes that are taking place across the industry. So let's talk a second about the new normal. So new normal, health and safety protocols define and train. So you know, we're trying to address and build solutions to a problem that is what seems like forever evolving, right? So it's like you're trying to find solutions to one question that becomes obsolete the next week or the next month, and it's really trying to navigate and find a way forward. But then aside from even once you find a solution, and this is why I spend a lot of time talking about the adoption side of things, is that you have to train. And yes, we are making use of a lot of virtual technologies and resources, again, whether it comes from an education and training standpoint, but we have to be cognizant of the fact that whenever you think about communities and whenever you think about a sector in an industry, and especially whenever you think about something as important as health and safety, whenever you think about the chain, there's that old adage, you're only as strong as your weakest link. And you have to make sure that you are capturing everybody in that value chain whenever it comes to the health and safety protocols. And there is not a one size fits all type of solution to deliver that training. And to build that capacity is probably the better catchment that we need to think about. So market innovation, you know, the way, again, that we deliver services, the way that we think about tourism, you know, so in a lot of times, and cruises kind of a good example of kind of whenever you have a mass set of people, literally thousands of people coming in to a destination and into an area at one point in time, you know, traditionally this industry has really been built on and thrived around large groups. And those are the ones that make the difference. But we have to think about how we are innovating some of those business models. Another comment that was made in the previous session, and this was related to applications and Wi-Fi and those types of things. And it said, you know, and I can't remember the exact wording, but the concept behind the comment was, you know, to offer all these things isn't free. So even if it's, you know, again, whether different applications, even if there's hardware, because even for contact tracing, I've seen solutions that have come to us, that talk about visitors wearing bracelets or doing different things. So there's different ways of offering solutions, but it is important to note that even if it's software and not hardware, these things are not free, and it has to be something that we have to figure out who pays for it, whether it's the industry, whether it's the providers, whether it's the visitors, but there has to be a win-win solution that is found for the long term in some of this market innovation. Touchless solutions and this contactless types of solutions are extremely important. We've seen a lot of innovation around that already, primarily at the hotels. You're seeing a lot of the contactless types of solutions. You're also seeing it in the food and beverage, even in the tour operations and those types of things. And I expect to see a lot more as that goes. Health screening, both for visitors and employees. One quick comment that I'll make whenever it comes to employees. So we were having a session with some of our stakeholders recently, and one of the comments that was made is that the service provider was talking about how, yes, they have, at their hotel, they have, they follow really stringent health and safety protocols. So, you'd have everybody wearing masks, sanitizing, doing everything that they're supposed to. But one of the comments or the points of discussions or the challenges that was brought up is that from the minute that employee steps out of the premises, then it becomes an issue of personal responsibility. So yes, you can enforce change and kind of habits within a particular setting, but with the pandemic that we are facing currently, this has to be something that is embraced in terms of, how you wear your mask, how you social distance, how you sanitize and everything else, even outside of the premises, because this is a case where things that employees are doing, and certainly visitors, but in this case, the interesting perspective was employees, how they manage themselves even outside of the premises becomes a huge deal in terms of managing the overall health and safety of the sites and attractions and accommodation and so forth. There's new business models. I touched a little bit on that. And then data. And this is something that I think is very relevant for here, because one of the questions that I think has to be answered. So there's a real, there is a big push, and I can speak even here in Trinidad and Tobago, for whenever it comes to contact tracing, everywhere that you go is capturing your data, right? So your name, where you live, your phone number, whether you went to a gym or a pool or sometimes even retail stores, everybody's capturing this data because they're trying to support, they're trying to support the contact tracing and those types of things. But one thing that's relevant in this type of setting is answering the questions about, okay, so we're capturing data, but how are you capturing the data? In terms of, and I'm talking from your local hardware store who is, you're writing down, all of your personal information whenever you enter the retail outlet. So they're keeping like a hard copy of this, but how long do they need to keep it for? How do they store it? Who has access to it? How, and I know that, again, referencing the analogy of a horse already bolting from the stable, because it's already happening, even while we're trying to define the parameters around this. But it's something that certainly, even as a tourism industry, which is very person and human centric, and traditionally very, very high touch, we have to answer about, so even whenever we're capturing this data, what are we doing with it and how are we managing it appropriately? And the answers that and the solutions that we come up with have to be able to trickle down to the proverbial small man, right? And it has to be solutions that can work without having to invest in a huge ERP system, to manage all this data. We have to find solutions that are agile, but also very appropriate, both from a national standpoint and a long-term sustainable standpoint, but that are also offering solutions that are relevant to the needs of each destination today, and things that we need to be doing. Getting the message out. So one of the big things here, and this speaks to marketing and promotion, which is another big thing that is happening, even even in places like, again, Trinidad and Tobago, where the borders are still closed, there's a lot of investment going on into marketing and promotion because we're looking forward to a future, right? We're not, there's a saying, even the longest days have their end. And we know that the pandemic will come to an end at some point in time. And so you have a lot of marketing and promotion coming out. And the biggest thing that the tourism industry has to do, and has to do quickly, is so a lot of these things that I have been talking about in terms of the different both solutions and as well as challenges that are being faced, all of this leads to restoring confidence, because the minute that you break that trust and the minute that individuals do not feel safe traveling to a destination, tourism is once again kind of brought to its knees, so to speak, in terms of its ability to get back on its feet. Whenever I talked about the business models and some of the innovation that's coming forward, we are seeing a lot of VR and AR types of opportunities and things that are happening. But this is where the issue of monetization and the issue of building a business model around it become really important. Because again, yes, people are doing virtual tours and doing VR type of things, you know, from the comfort of their home, or for the augmented reality. I mean, I really hope to see some continued innovation here, so that, you know, you can give yourself, and even whenever I talk to self-service there, you allow visitors to kind of self-service and be able to go out into a destination, and they have, you know, their phone up in the app. And sorry, as I'm looking off my screen, I'm looking to downtown Port of Spain, but you know, you can imagine yourself walking, you know, through a city, and you're having an AR type of app that is giving you information in a really valuable type of experience. But we need to think about how that is supported from a business perspective. Digital platforms, whether it's pre-arrival as well as in destination, historically, again, this industry has relied heavily on traditional means of communication. So physical maps, brochures, a lot of things that are high touch. All of these things, now is the time that these things have to become more digital and adopted in a digital way. And then I realize I'm quickly running out of time, so I just have this slide and one more, but I'll just kind of give some future scenarios in terms of you know, and this is, again, feels like an ever-changing reality, but just thinking about where we go from here. So there's a book that was published called oh my goodness, it was called, I forget the name of the book, but it's talking about the experience economy, right? So you talk about the Industrial Revolution, and then you talk about services coming after the Industrial Revolution. And then there's a real push and thrust towards this issue of an experience economy, where it's more than just a service being provided, but it is what is the experience that is had within a destination. And I think in terms of trends and where the industry is heading, is finding customized, personal, authentic experiences. But where it becomes very important, and this is where the overlap with technology comes in, is that cannot work in a high touch, you know, kind of one-on-one type of scenario. In order for this customized, personal, authentic experience to work, it has to be delivered in ways that rely on technology to be able to service that. Because traditional service providers, you know, they can't be doing one-on-one tours, you know, to just very, you know, say even like families or small groups of fives or that sort of thing, in the way that they delivered it to large groups before, where you're seeing the economies of scale. Because we're not going to have those same economies of scale in the tourism of the future. You have to be able to break it down to these small and very personal experiences, but you have to find a way to make it still profitable for the business. Otherwise, you're not going to have any service providers to give you those experiences in the long run. And we really will also see a reimagining of events. So right now, I'm sure most everybody would be aware, we have the CPL tournament going on, but it's CPL without a crowd. But you'll see a lot of branding opportunities, you know, that are coming up. So looking at it still as a marketing and promotion type of investment to be able to get the word out. But you have to reimagine what sports looks like. Carnival, there's a lot of questions there, and I don't have any answers. I don't pretend to have any answers from my side. But whenever we look forward to Carnival, which is a huge thing, certainly in Trinidad and Tobago, but even within the destination, you know, how is that being reimagined and how is that being delivered in 2021? These mega business conferences, and again, this isn't just our region specific, but business and conference tourism is huge in the industry. But all that is changing. One, people don't want to travel, plus in terms of travel for business, because you're seeing a lot more, just like this conference is a prime example, you're seeing a lot more digital types of deliveries, whereas there would have been in person previously. So a lot of even business tourism is having to be reimagined. We do see higher demands for ecotourism, health and wellness. There's a lot of staycations that are happening. And even this idea of regional bubbles, where you have, I think one of the first places that took this up was Australia and New Zealand, you know, where you have an area, at least, that has managed the pandemic well, and they at least allow travel between their borders. So that may be something that is up for consideration. And then I talked about this within the initial point, which was this access to broadband and capacity to utilize within the sector, and we have to build that out. So my last slide that I'll end with is, of course, the Visit Trinidad, whenever our borders do reopen. You know, that continuous promotion and looking at tourism as a whole. So I hope I didn't go too far over time, Nigel, but I will stop there and hopefully at least allow that to be a good place for discussion.
Thank you very much, Heidi. I think it was quite edifying. I think you brought it home in terms of the context in which we are looking. And from what you said, this might be a good time actually for me to bring some other supporting information that I was able to get from the OECS Secretariat related to their own circumstances. And a lot of what they are looking at came out in your own presentation. In the Caribbean, prior to COVID-19, there existed and it still exists, the Caribbean Tourism and Health Program, right? And that's a collaboration of CARFA, that's the public health agency, the Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association, the Caribbean Tourism Organization, and the individual countries as well, to basically oversee appropriate health and safety protocols to make sure that tourism can function effectively throughout the Caribbean. When COVID hit though, a particular initiative was taken to form a task force, a COVID-19 task force. So apart from CARFA, the Hotel and Tourism Association and CTO, they brought in the OECS as well, OECS Secretariat, and Global Tourism Resiliency and Crisis Management Center to contribute to the work of this task force. And this task force produced lots of stuff, and including guidelines and key criteria for reopening of tourism. They came up with a whole bunch of checklists for all the stakeholders and so on in the region. And they have a very nice report actually that's available online. Looking at, say, technological solutions, apart from, say, of course, there'll be the medical protocols and so on. But if I were to focus on some of the checklists that they provided for that were relevant to technological solutions, they were looking at the area of surveillance and monitoring. And Heidi mentioned this in terms of different techniques people have been considering and using for contact tracing, or just tracking who was where, and maybe using bracelets and that sort of thing. But I'd say even prior to that, there was a computerized monitoring system that was set up. They call it THIS, the Tourism Health Information System, which is a web-based, a confidential web-based application for real-time syndrome surveillance of populations in the tourist accommodations. So they have had that in place, and that itself would have certain confidentiality protocols and so on associated with it, right? Because, well, it's personal in information. Specifically related to COVID, though, there's also contact tracing and all the various possibilities that are being put forward using mobile phones and all these sorts of things. And it is recognized, though, in writing in the report, though, that these must be balanced against any relevant data protection regulations, nationally, regionally, internationally. And we just had a nice discussion about the status of data protection laws around the Caribbean. So any contact tracing must be cognizant of those things. Another section in the task force report relates to technology and digitization specifically. And this is where all the touchless or contactless initiatives come out, contactless payments and mobile phone check-ins and that sort of thing. Digital keys at accommodations, e-tickets purchases. Well, of course, that was already well developed even before COVID, all the booking engines and so on. So, but there is now a thrust in tourist accommodations to things like automatic faucets, automatic dispensers, and so on, touchless or minimizing. And they've even mentioned touchless garbage bins. So one of just to bring home or support, Heidi, the initial objectives that you started with, 3 areas were noted, or 3 kind of strategic thrust areas. One is for reviving the tourism industry. One is the compliance with health protocols, and you talked about that. The second is specific digitalization and use of technological applications like the contactless. And the third one I was noted is the first one that you had, which is adoption, driving widespread adoption. How did you could take a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. You can put all the tools there, but you have to be able to get the adoption that you need, and especially so when you're thinking about the Caribbean islands is usually not mass tourism. It's usually small and medium-sized enterprises. And the solutions have to reach those people who are doing destination or experience type tourism. You have Airbnb type accommodation, tour operators, and so on. And in this specific regard, those are the type of operators that might think, you know, adopting these technological solutions, I can't afford it, or, you know, it's difficult for me. I also had made contact with the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, and they have a digital EC currency pilot going on. And this is one of the tools that could possibly be used to reach those types of enterprises. I'll read a little quote I got from a message from Ms. Sybil Welch at the ECCB, who is one of the key persons in that program, in that pilot. The design of the pilot will be able to facilitate visitors accessing a value-based digital cash wallet and using that payment platform for goods and services offered by micro and small businesses that form part of the region's tourism product. So there are fintech type solutions as well that we need to bring into play in reviving the industry. So I think what was provided from the Eastern Caribbean, the OECS Secretariat, gels well with everything that you've said, and I suppose it would, because I'm sure we're all working in the same sort of Caribbean tourism circles. So that's very good to know. So I'll move on now to hear from the Cayman Islands and take a different perspective away from the tourism industry, and let's hear from the perspective of someone who has been a regulator what are some of the approaches being taken in the Cayman Islands. So I'll introduce now Mr. Alee Farmoy, and he's the former Executive Director for ICT at the Office of Regulation for Cayman Islands. So Alee, all yours.
Thanks, Nigel. I'll just quickly share my screen and jump straight into it while I'm trying to do that. Let you know that I spent probably 20 years in telecoms, a number of years in financial services with Deloitte and doing technology consulting across the Caribbean.
Are you a little far from your mic? You're not coming so clearly.
Close to it. I'll speak up and get a little closer about that.
Yes, a little better.
And moved into regulation. So my presentation is on what we've done in terms of policy and in terms of technology, where those things come together with tourism in terms of a convergence, if you will. And I think everybody's struggling with the same sort of issues. So real quick, I think we've all gone through this the same pain, so I won't belabor where we all came from, but it's basically different levels of pain that we're trying to navigate and get through country by country, and we're all pretty much in the same. So we went through a number of these phases already. Lockdown, where everything had to stop and we had to get control of the virus, and there were curfews and whatnot put in place. Lifted that a bit to allow local movements, but our borders were still closed, to limited travel and enabling residents to come home, and also enabling technical staff to come in to assist. Are you hearing me okay, Nigel?
I'm just about okay. It could be better. Yeah.
All right, and then eventually getting to where we want to be and where tourism needs to get to, which is a big part of all our economies, which is reopening borders. So under lockdown, we had to deploy new types of technology to implement curfews, to decide who were essential staff, healthcare, police, etc., figuring out what security issues we had as a country, and testing. I think everybody struggled with testing. So I'll go through what we did for lockdown, because it helped us learn how to deploy some technologies for the next phase, and eventually to get to reopening our borders. We basically helped, my agency helped the government deploy something we call curfew time. So we moved from individual emails and requests for exemption to the curfew restrictions to an online system defining what essential staff were. So here's a view of the online form that we did, which led to an automated email that would go out to whoever was requesting an exemption from the curfew restrictions. And that automated email would be signed electronically by the particular government officer who was granting the essential service. The workflow we did was pretty basic, but basically it was paperless. Any documentation we needed in terms of identification and so forth were uploaded online. Emails were sent automatically back and forth to the applicants to keep them advised. Electronic signature was applied at the very end. There was automatic routing to make sure that the right kind of people approved, and there was an audit log for all of this. These are essential pieces of technology that I think the e-government reps were talking about yesterday. The difference is that you didn't have months to build and prepare this kind of system. You had to deploy it quickly and on the fly. Right now, we're in the phase where we have limited travel. We're allowing some travel into the country. We're exploring things like bubble concepts, which I think Heidi mentioned. But no matter what we do, folks have got to go into quarantine and we've got to test. One of the things we did with testing, for example, was we were working with CARFA initially, and then we developed our own capabilities for COVID-19 testing. Basically, we reached out to a supplier in South Korea and sent a private plane to South Korea to pick up, I can't remember, 100,000 test kits or something like that. and brought those back to Cayman. So now we're looking at a variation of these processes for travel time to basically allow travel into and out of the country. It's the same sort of concept, but the thing I want to focus on here is the need for quarantine. We have facilities that we're using here in Cayman for quarantine of travelers who are inbound. Obviously, the borders are closed, the hotels are empty, so we are working with a number of hotel properties to provide quarantine facilities for inbound travelers. In order for us to move to a point where we want to reopen our borders and reopen tourism, we've still got to address quarantine, we've got to address testing, we've got to work with the airlines. So how do we do that? One plan is to basically leverage what we've done thus far. Somebody books with an airline, they get into a hotel facility, a quarantine facility, and we test them. The problems with this is that it's costly. Somebody's got to pay for that facility for 14 days, and we've got to monitor and test within the country. And obviously you lose 14 days of time. So if somebody comes and wants to spend 3 weeks vacation time in your country, they've got to spend 2 weeks of that in quarantine. Not a happy way to spend a vacation. But what if we could take that test, and instead of doing it after they get off the plane, we did it before they actually got on the plane? So we're exploring some technologies and partnerships with airlines that would enable us to test travelers before they actually board the aircraft. The challenges, of course, are integrating with all the various airlines because they have their own systems and standardizing on the healthcare protocols. So we're working with a number of agencies, including Oxford Health Institute, and a number of providers who can do the testing and monitor the travelers while they're in their originating country, and do a final test before they board the aircraft so that we know they're clear before they arrive in country. That way they can spend all of their time vacationing as opposed to spending time in a quarantine facility. So basically all I'm saying is that what we've learned from our curfew and the experiences that we're doing right now, we're hoping to lead to a position where we can deploy those technologies and those lessons so that we can open our borders, but open them safely. And that was my update. I just wanted to leave the floor open to any questions going forward. Back to you, Nigel.
Thank you, Alee. It's quite interesting, actually. The number of things that you've done and tried. Actually, the online form that you get a response back with a letter kind of thing. I think I saw something being done like that in, I believe it was Dubai or some of those Middle Eastern or Asian countries where they had an automated system for managing the number of people. Yes, I think it was Dubai, somewhere in UAE anyway, where I saw that happening. Let me see then. So our Q&A, I go to our Q&A. Has Cayman looked at bracelets or tracking devices to allow for better monitoring of persons in self-quarantine?
Yeah, we had a company that was in our special economic zone who was trialing a technology here using something akin to a Fitbit bracelet that which allowed geofencing and tracking of the individual, monitors heart rate and oxygen saturation. We're also looking at something called a bio button. There's a trial going on right now with the chief medical officer who's looking at how this bio button would be able to monitor the health of the individual. We have issues with all those technologies because of the data privacy law, which is our version of GDPR, and making sure that the data that we capture on the individual is kept confidential, or as confidential as it needs to be. So those trials are ongoing. Right.
And actually, as you mentioned, the data privacy laws, it was said in the previous panel that Cayman had recently enacted some data protection laws that will fairly well aligned to GDPR. You want to say anything about that?
Yeah, part of my team, my former general counsel, actually helped with the drafting of the data protection law here, and it was modeled after GDPR. And we worked with so when our licensee asked for an experimental license for this bracelet, I pointed them in the direction of the Data Protection Law Office, the Office of the Ombudsman, because the concept is that if you were going to deploy that technology, whether it was here in Cayman or as part of a regional or international platform, it would have to be data protection law and therefore GDPR compliant. So
Right.
yeah, very familiar with it, and we're looking for the alignment, or whatever the legal term is, to have our data protection law be recognized as by the EU as GDPR compliant.
Okay, thank you. Maybe I'll ask back to Heidi. Heidi, I know, well, we here in Trinidad, our borders are still closed, so tourist arrivals is not something that we are having right now. But can you say anything about what plans we might have in place for the time when it opens again? Do we have any technologically related measures that we would likely bring into force?
Sure. So, I mean, I will say, in terms of, I have been part of some working groups that have been looking at whether it's the protocols or just the procedures for the reopening of the borders. And it's important to note that, you know, there's both the airport and also the seaport, right? In terms of for cruise and that sort of thing, whenever it eventually comes. And there are a lot of solutions. I think those decisions will be driven primarily by health as well as by national security. So, you know, the extent to which one particular solution has been chosen, I wouldn't be able to speak to, but I know absolutely, just like Alee is sharing, there's a wealth of solutions out there. But I think the questions that every destination, including ours, is facing is, again, who is paying for it, and where, and aside from the data protection and how the data is collected, stored, analyzed, shared, and acted upon, because it's one thing to collect data, but it's another thing to make it actionable, to know what to do with it, to have the right protocols and resources in place to be able to treat with it. And I really emphasize the human aspect, or go back to the human aspect of that, because it's not, it can't just be a one ministry, one provider, you know, or one solution. It really has to take this kind of multi-layered, and I'd even use the word nuanced approach in terms of how those protocols are put in place. Because, you know, the other aspect of tourism that I think we need to be thinking about whenever borders reopen is, so at least in Trinidad, over 40% of our visitors historically come from the US, right? Both in terms of persons coming in, as well as whenever people are leaving Trinidad, over 40% go to the US. And I think whenever you look at, because most of us would just be, you know, whether watching news or keeping track of trends that are up there, you have to think about the consumer behavior. And even if the destinations come up with solutions like bracelets or like apps, you have to think about the consumer behavior whenever they come to our destination. How are they going to behave here? You know, in terms of going back to, again, that watchword of adoption, but how our visitors who are from the leisure side, and it is important that we think of tourism not just as leisure tourists, right? But tourists also include education, medical, business. There's a whole breadth of tourism that is not just leisure. But whenever you think about the leisure market, and you think about persons coming to get away and rest and relax, you know, how is their behavior going to be in the destination? And I think that aspect of the human behavior, above and beyond saying, okay, we got the protocols, I got the solution, I got the bracelets that everybody has to put on, but you have to think about what are the strategies in that communication and the things that we are doing as a destination to still create the right experience, but to do it in a very safe manner. And though that's kind of the balance and approach that we have to take at this point in time.
Thank you. We do have a little time, so what I'll do, I'll allow the possibility for verbal interventions from our audience. So my colleagues who are backing me up, please keep an eye on, we'll allow people to raise hand and keep an eye to bring to my attention anyone who might be doing so. In the meantime, I'll come back to Alee. Alee, Cayman's borders are open, I believe. If so, what measures are you all actually having in place right now to control the COVID-19 risk for visitors and travelers in and out of Cayman?
So our borders are not open. We're allowing restricted travel. I'm sorry if you lost my video. I've been playing with a brand new webcam, and it doesn't like me very much. So what we're allowing is limited travel. So we allow folks who are employees. There might be kids that need to go back to boarding school or to college. So we're booking those outbound trips on special flights. British Airways, for example, has a twice weekly flight schedule that they have with us. But we have the very restricted travel time process that we're going through to make sure that folks who are outbound have all the requisite arrangements to travel to the country they're going to, whether it's Canada, US, or UK. And then on the inbound side, we put people into quarantine. So if you're a resident or a government employee, your quarantine facility is paid for by the government. If you are a returning resident or an expat who's coming to Cayman because you work here, you have a work permit, or you own property, you have to pay for your own quarantine costs. And we have a number of different hotels. We have Holiday Inn for basic. And if that doesn't suit your needs, if you really, really want to be here, but you don't like that facility, you can pay for a quarantine facility at the Ritz-Carlton, for example. So we're flexible in that, but you know, to folks like Heidi who are looking at the tourism product, our tourism product is dead, all right? And it's gone. That's 20% of GDP that's gone. And we don't expect cruise tourism to come back before 2021, for example. But we are very cognizant that folks really want to get out of wherever they are and the risks that they're facing in the US and Canada and wherever, and are willing to charter a private plane, for example, to come here. So what we're trying to do is figure out, okay, what's the next step to accommodate that level of guest who wants to come to Cayman? How can we test them before they even get on the plane so that they don't have to be in a quarantine facility when they get here? So the next step is actually properly opening the borders, and we've set October as our time frame to reopen the borders. So we're looking at those technologies. We're looking at bracelets. We're looking at bio buttons. We're looking at workflow. We're looking at working with airlines and what kind of medical testing protocols would we have to put into place so we could be sure that we're doing the right thing.
Okay. I think we have a request from the floor. Ms. Deidre Williams. Deidre, if you can speak, you can go ahead now. Let's see if I can find her.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I'm hearing you.
Good. St. Lucia's done very well in terms of preserving local health. But I wondered whether in the region generally, the tourism authorities are working to persuade tourists that the preservation of local good health is a priority for the tourists as well as for the locals. There have been reported cases where tourists who were allowed to come and stay at a hotel broke boundaries, went outside, and therefore put the local population at risk. Thank you.
Sure, so I can jump in there if you want, Nigel.
Yes, please.
Okay. So the short answer to that is yes, absolutely. In terms of the preservation of the health and safety of the destinations, and I think that's not just the tourism, but you see that even looking at the issue of border reopenings, you know, you'll see that deep desire inside of every citizen, but certainly the leaders at health, national security, and tourism in this regards, is that there is that desire to educate as well as to encourage and in some cases enforce those boundaries and that sort of thing. But this goes back to the whole training and adoption, right? In terms of even how employees within the sector and local citizens know how to respond whenever they see risks, whenever they see, whenever they encounter different things. They have to know what are the protocols and the steps that we take to ensure that that our destinations remain protected. And I think one of the things that is helping in terms of while during this time while the borders are closed for those of us that still have closed borders, is whenever we look at the staycation opportunities and the domestic tourism, it is providing a lot of that sensitization and behavioral patterns, first within the destination. And then because if you had everyone within the destination being very lackadaisical and not following protocols, not wearing masks, if they go to a place, they refuse to give their information. If you have everybody in the destination behaving badly, then of course, whenever people come, they're gonna behave badly as well. But whenever you first build the right behaviors and responsibilities here at home, and then you can encourage and enforce those and kind of build those whenever the visitors come in, then that's a big portion of kind of that issue of adoption and following of the protocols. And then I think to the wider issue, kind of the next phase that you're speaking to, which is how do we enforce and so forth. But I think it begins with managing and setting the expectation before the visitors even arrive. You know, so I've seen a lot of things from other destinations, Barbados, I think Bahamas and Jamaica have all done really well in putting out a lot of, whether it's videos, whether it's kind of social media friendly. It's not just like pamphlets or those types of things, but very easy to read and access. This is what you can expect when you get to the airport. This is what you should expect whenever you arrive at the hotel, and managing those expectations from early. And I think the more across the region that we harmonize what some of those expectations are, and I think, you know, that is taking place. That helps to kind of solve a problem before it becomes a problem. Because again, if the visitor is coming down expecting to just behave a little wildly and not wear masks, break different protocols, that's a much bigger issue, that has to take place. But I do remember. And this is, and then I'll stop, Nigel, after this one little piece. But I remember reading early on, this may have been back in like the May, June timeframe. So Hawaii had put in place some of these quarantine things, and they would have kind of a hotline if a guest stepped outside of the hotel or was seen on the beach, even posting social media. They had kind of a hotline set up where those guests could be reported. And then they actually had in place, fines or different penalties that would have been enacted to people that kind of broke those. So those are things that as individual destinations, but even as a region, that we do have to consider, that are being considered, and will continue to evolve.
Thank you. I don't know if you have any comment on that issue about tourists behaving badly, Alee?
Send them back.
Sorry?
Send them back.
Oh, send them back. Okay. I don't have new questions. I don't think I see anyone else asking for the floor. So I think what I'll do is I'll probably seek to wind up. We talked about the tourism, the impact on tourism, and possible steps for reviving it in a region where, for many of our countries, tourism is either the largest contributor to GDP or might be the largest contributor to employment, and in some cases both for some Caribbean territories. We've been made aware of the huge impact on tourism by COVID, and we've heard a lot about possible technological solutions to it. In many of our territories, people are considering the use of certain tools, whether it's bracelets, cell phones for contact tracing or whatever. And we are aware of the data protection requirements there. But in terms of bringing those solutions to fruition, there are some outstanding issues that we noted, like the cost, who's going to pay, and possibly also some sort of standardization. Maybe we have to work a bit on our systems for standardizing some of these technological solutions, bringing them to market quickly, such that in cases where we need to expedite, we can properly expedite. So I think costs and standardization. We can do what we can as well to encourage our local entrepreneurs, our local expertise, to be developing some appropriate homegrown solutions. And actually this afternoon, in our final panel, we'll be looking at entrepreneurism in terms of post-COVID response. So that might be an occasion where we get some input or some further suggestions. So at this point, I'd say thank you very much to our two featured speakers, Ms. Heidi Alert, acting CEO of the Tourism Trinidad, and Mr. Alee from OfReg or giving the perspective of the OfReg in Cayman Islands. Thank you very much. I think we had quite a good, rich discussion, and we look forward to your, even further participation in the rest of our CIGF. Thank you very much.